First Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
And a very warm welcome to Newsline Live, the 15th program this year in 2023. Now that most people will probably get paid tomorrow. There's a lot of taxation going on, and many people will feel this when they look at their pay slips tomorrow, I suppose, and in the coming days. To discuss that, the growing new crisis, which is, I call the taxation crisis. To discuss that, we've got the CEO of Expenditure, which is a economic think tank in Sri Lanka, and the award-winning Dhananath Fernando. He's right here. Very good evening, Dhanna.
Good evening, Faraz.
Now, you did win an award and all that, didn't you?
Yes.
Well done for that.
Thank you very much,
Well
Faraz.
done. So, international recognition for the work y'all do.
Yes.
Very good. That it's so essential for credibility and all that, isn't it?
Yes. Thank you, Faraz. Yes.
Very good. And well done. But now, Dhanna, to me, there's just another crisis that has arrived. That's the taxation crisis. They're going to tax, they brought the tax net, if you like, down, so there are more people. But with all of this, is it enough for the government to meet its recurrent expenditure?
No, Faraz. Simple answer is no. But it doesn't mean when we say no, the audience might think whether do you recommend to tax more to cover that recurrent expenditure? Definitely not. So I think at the moment our tax to GDP ratio or tax to GDP ratio is about 8%.
Right.
Ideally, it has to be increased to about 15 to 17%.
Yeah.
But this will not cover our recurrent expenditure, and that is why we are advocating, we are saying that cutting down expenditure is a must, and we have to start from there.
Right.
Of course, for a government to run, there has to be revenue, so the tax revenue has to increase.
Yeah.
But it has to ideally start from the revenue end. It has to start ideally from the expenditure end, because given the situation and the context, otherwise people's binding will be difficult to get for reforms, because people might feel, of course they are feeling already, that all the burden that has happened due to economic mismanagement now being passed on people's shoulders, which is also right. So that is why we say it has to start from the expenditure end. Of course, the tax revenue has to increase. For that, we have to increase the tax base. I feel some of the tax rates are slightly higher than the ideal rate, but definitely the expenditure side management has to happen. Without that, it would be very difficult for us to move forward.
And of course, you say, we need to manage our expenditure, and therefore, I suppose by implication, we need to try and maximize our tax collection. That's the ultimate sacrifice, when you have to pay out money in the belief, in the real belief that this will be used to help everybody, to help the country. In that context, what about a government expenditure on the civil service, which is apparently very bloated? It's a favorite place for politicians to park their voters. You go and get yourself a degree, or you meet the minimum, and then you get a government job. It doesn't matter that there is no need for that job, but you get a government job. How about making the civil service lean and mean? Trim the fat.
Absolutely, that is one of the main reforms that has to happen, because our ratio for government workers is about 1 government worker for 17 people. But if you go to India, it's about 1 for 177. Pakistan approximately about 1 for 113.
And Sri Lanka is
1 to 16.
Oh, okay.
So, and also it's massively a tail-heavy government sector that we have, and the people who are at the top level, who should be well paid and who should be capable, has to sacrifice, because we have a very tail-heavy government sector workers. And as you know, now for debt restructuring and all sorts of reforms, we need to have a capable public service, but that is not there. And of course, they are paid they are not reasonably paid. Their average salaries are 60,000 to 100,000, and at 50% inflation, and we all know what was happening to the cost of living for the last few months. That of course is waiving them for many corruption and many other illegal activities. So definitely there has to be a balance. So for that, definitely we have to cut the fat, and I mean we have to start it immediately with a VRS program. And I think at the moment there are some measures they have tried, they have indicated, but small measures is not enough given the gravity of our crisis. We have to move forward. But again, having said that, the poor people, the most vulnerable people who are mainly in the informal sector, they are the ones who are suffering at a greater scale. So for them we have to have better social safety net, because otherwise it would be very difficult. Our current social safety net expenditure is not at all adequate. We are just spending 50 billion rupees for an entire year for all our samurdhi with poor people, and in the samurdhi most of the non-deserving people are in the scheme. So that structure has to go hand in hand. I think rather than taking selective approaches, we have to look at the holistic picture and drive the reform agenda. No point just looking at one area and just driving on that, because that will cause unnecessary issues and reluctance on the reform program.
And thank you very much for your questions. You can send them by SMS or WhatsApp. 0772 300 305, 0772 300 305. I believe a card come up on your screens right now, but if you don't, 0772 300 305. And here's one of several. Are the politicians, including the President, the Prime Minister and ministers, and all of them, do they have a different tax structure?
No. Ideally, I mean, they have to pay the taxes.
So they have one tax structure.
There's one tax structure.
Same for you, me, and them.
Absolutely. But I'm not having said that. That is the legal scenario.
Yeah.
But generally, what happens is in these contexts for us, they come up with like a small text print and they get themselves exempted from these taxes. And now, for an example, ministers, president, prime ministers, they all entitled for several bungalows, different number of vehicles. Their personal staff and all that. So ideally, that all has to be captured.
Right.
And the same similar practices have been maintained by some of the state-owned enterprises as well. Sometimes they ask the state-owned enterprises to cover their pay tax.
Yeah.
I think that is also not acceptable. Everyone has to be treated equally when it comes to taxes, and ideally everyone has to pay taxes according to the new tax regime.
So, for example, I was looking at some documentation today. It says here that planters, estate bungalows, you need to give them a place to stay. So when they can, unless of course you have superintendents and kanganis and so on who travel to work, but it doesn't happen like that. Anyway, estate bungalows here, if the monthly remuneration is not more, or if it is more than 200,000, the estate bungalow will be charged at 20,000 rupees, or 7.5% of remuneration, whichever is less. That's a big chunk of money if it's 20,000 rupees. Then, if this residence is furnished, this is brilliant, 2.5% of remuneration, or 5,000 rupees a month, whichever is less. So even they are being hit. So I don't see why the president, if he's being given 2 houses, which I believe he is, why he can't pay the appropriate tax, because it's a benefit in kind.
Absolutely, Faraz.
I mean, this president, all right, it's a bad example because the house is a problem and all that. But let's say he can stay in one house. Why do you need 2? After all, Sri Lanka is a safe country now. We've got a mega-sized army, well, military. They won the war. There is no terrorism problem. They even fixed the Easter problem. That's why they got elected. So I have to believe that they fixed it. Doesn't matter that nobody has been prosecuted so far, but that's a separate question. But the fact is that Sri Lanka is a safe place. and we market it as a safe place. So why does my president need two houses?
Absolutely, Faraz.
Unless he's willing to pay the tax.
Yeah, so I think the tax has to be equal to everyone, and I think there's so much facilities being provided for state sectors. If you look at even the banks, and each state enterprise generally have a holiday bungalow in Anuradhapura, in Nuwara, everywhere, and that is also capturing the state land.
Yeah.
And again, the ministers, the prime ministers, every high dignitary has been provided similar kind of facilities. That is how we have been expanding the state sector. So in this case, ideally they all have to pay their fair share of taxes.
And you know, the cars, the president is probably having around 30, a fleet of about 30 to 40 cars. All right, let's take the security aspect out of it and don't charge him tax on that, because we can't have our president being killed, can we? You know, it's not very good for all sorts of things. But what about the others? Why does he need so many cars? He can have, if he has two dummy cars, well then, you know, sorry, take the two dummy cars out of the equation, pay the tax on the others. Because if you were an ordinary citizen, you have to pay for it. Then you have to pay, because it's a benefit in kind. So why can't they start there?
Absolutely, Faraz. I think for president and maybe prime minister and few other senior officials, there may be official 1 or 2 cars, but the problem is, if you look at the state sector across, all the ministerial deputy secretaries, everyone has been given a car and a driver, and then they have to maintain a pool to work overtime, to work during weekends, and that's how it has become talent. So what I would like to recommend is mainly give them an allowance, so it's also easy to tax.
Yeah.
And you need not to make it too complicated, like if you are using a car, you have to pay this and fuel deduct and all that.
Yeah.
So you just give them an allowance, so then they can use whatever the car that they want, and with that you can significantly cut down the state expenditure, because then otherwise you have to maintain fuel, you have to repair the vehicles, for that you need a staff, and you have to manage so many things. And that is of course opening a lot of windows for corruption. But if you give them the cash, if they can use the public transport, they can either rent a vehicle, they can buy a vehicle, and they can keep it for themselves. That's very easy and convenient. I think those reforms needs to come into place. And also I think there's a bad system of giving vehicle permits, and for parliamentarians and many others. So I think if everyone is paying their fair share of taxes, I don't see a reason for few sectors or few people to exempt or provide a tax relief, and it is quite unfortunate these vehicle permits are being traded at the secondary market and basically
Fueling the black economy.
absolutely fueling the black economy. So I think that's why we have to look at things at a holistic point of view and go big on reforms, because rather than just trying to tinker here and there, it will probably, you know, intensify or amplify the problem rather than solving it.
Now, in the context of the Supreme Court, the you know, groundbreaking Supreme Court ruling the other day for compensation to be paid by, amongst others, President Sirisena, the Defense Secretary, the IGP, and so on at the time. If you take that just as one, because the Supreme Court has held that they were liable for a dereliction of their duties, basically. In essence, they may not have used those words, but we all know what that means. The point is, in that context, who should be responsible if these ministers' payments are not being deducted at source? Is it the Treasury Secretary? Is he the one who's signing it all off and sending the money to all these MPs and ministers and everybody else?
I'm not sure about the protocol, but it is definitely done under the Treasury, because there's a separate department.
So they shouldn't be sending out so much money. They should deduct it at source. We have somebody like the Treasury Secretary here, Mrs. J. Mrs. J makes sure that we all got our deductions done.
Yes.
And I'm sure the boss man will not be very pleased if Mrs. J didn't do her job.
Absolutely.
Well, the internal auditors have a fit to start with.
Absolutely. So those protocols has to come into place, and definitely it has to be even all the pay that has been deducted at the source. So that processors need to coming into the system.
There's a wonderful term for this in English. It's called "What's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander." Let's go for a break. We'll see you on the other side after the headlines from Primetime News team.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Farazz Shauketaly.
Newsfirst headlines. Main sponsor.
Durden's Hospital, dedicated to you. Experience the best in healthcare at Durden's Hospital's new Alfred Place wing. We continue to evolve into a purpose-built hospital of the future, with an ambience built to deliver world-class care. Durden's Hospital, dedicated to you.
Professionals' trade unions warn of strict action if the unjust tax regime is not withdrawn. Minister Bandula Gunawardena says Sri Lanka will not get IMF funds if taxes are not raised. Power outages to continue. Energy Secretary, PUCSL chief summoned by the Human Rights Commission over power outages during advanced level period. Mihintale Thera issues strong statement to the president. Opposition leader condemns renewed attempts to delay the election. Nomination papers for Mount Lavinia contain fake signature of Dayasiri Jayasekara.
Newsfirst headlines. Main sponsor.
Durden's Hospital, dedicated to you. Experience the best in healthcare at Durden's Hospital's new Alfred Place wing. We continue to evolve into a purpose-built hospital of the future, with an ambience built to deliver world-class care. Durden's Hospital, dedicated to you.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Farazz Shauketaly.
And welcome back to Newsline Live. I'm in conversation with Mr. Dhananath Fernando, the CEO of Advocata, which is an independent economic think tank. Now then, many messages. Thank you very much. 0772 300 305. Most people are rather skeptical that our parliamentarians don't really pay. And many people are agreeing with your statement that whilst they're supposed to be the one tax class of people, that they do have this fine print which sort of says that we'll compensate you for that extra that you have to pay, which in short we are paying them. Some time ago it happened at the CB. Do you remember?
Yes.
They were getting paid their deductions.
Absolutely. There are some monopoly state enterprises who managed to do that. Even as we all know, during even this crisis period, there were some state-owned enterprises who got themselves bonuses even if they were loss-making, and some of them got themselves declared a salary increment from 15% to 25 to 30%. So that's the danger of monopoly, and of course that's quite unfortunate. But I think everyone has to be treated equally, and only if reforms takes place we will see that kind of new Sri Lanka for us. So that's why we all have to work towards, and I think that is possible, but it would be it would be a tough journey. It won't be easy.
I'm reading from the laws that govern these benefits which ought to be taxed. If an employee provided with more than one vehicle for official or private use, only one vehicle should be considered as provided for private use and as the benefit from employment for advanced personal income tax purpose. So that means if a minister or some politician has 2 or 3, he can only have one, who's personal. The others he must pay tax. That's what it means, right?
Absolutely, Faraz. The challenge is most of these ministers and even some Sri Lankans, they have this entitlement culture.
You're now talking.
Yes. So you should be somebody, and you always have to call someone to get something done, and this entitlement culture has to basically move away. And unfortunately, that corruption and that culture has been institutionalized, and that is the challenge. I was listening to someone on a podcast. What they said was, corruption is everywhere. That is true. In any country there will be some degree of corruption.
Yeah.
But institutionalizing the corruption is the challenge. And in other countries there is rule and law that we can always depend on. But when that is in absence, and when there's entitlement culture and there's corruption institutionalized, that is the challenge. It is very difficult to overturn this this culture. So that is what we all should stand for, and that is, I think this is a good starting point. And reforming the entire system, and otherwise we will stay in the same Sri Lanka that we have been seeing for the last 70-80 years without any progress. I think we all should stand for a different Sri Lanka where everyone has an equal opportunity, everyone live in harmony, there is no discrimination on caste or creed or religion. A free society is what we need.
I'm reminded of a story years ago, pre-Mandela days in South Africa, when I went there, and I sort of ventured into Soweto, and this man was telling us that they didn't want to pay their electric bills, and but it was imminent that Mandela would become, would be released and so on. I met him some months after Mandela had become the president again, and I said, how's your electricity issue going? And he said, you know what, we have to pay. We didn't think that a black president is going to make us pay. So, do you see what I mean? He thought, oh, well, once we have the end of apartheid and all that, then we'll be okay. But yeah. Obviously they had to pay. And so in that is the context that this whole entitlement, how do we get rid of this entitlement culture?
It is by having rule of law, and it will also should come to the education system, because what we see and experience is everyone, to get something done you always need to know some person, and that also falling to when you are trying a school, that you try to send your school where you can get some better network, where you can get things done. So it starts from the beginning, but I think what we need to do is as a new generation, we should stand against that. And in terms of reforms, when you allow the markets to work for us, because markets mainly work on meritocracy, because if someone provides a better product, a quality product, at a reasonable price, and if it gives me, fulfill my preferences, that will always stand a chance. So those are the things that we need to bring, that competition and meritocracy into the system is what is required. But adding to your story, there's this minister, I don't want to mention the name, once mentioned a good story. He said at the government sector there are 3 types of people.
Yeah.
High performers are corrupt.
Yeah.
He said all the high performers are corrupt. Even the ministers are finding it difficult, because if you do something to them, your entire system collapses. And there's a second segment who really don't want to take a risk. They just do the job, they just pass the time. The third, they write something on Facebook, and they are basically like, not neither good nor bad, they are just staying there. So out of these 3 categories, the high performers are always the opportunity, they grab the opportunity, but it's very difficult to tackle them, because they perform, and of course they are very corrupt, and they are running the system. So that's the challenge that we face. So it can only be done by limiting the size of the government and allowing the private sector to work, but it doesn't mean that the private sector is all good. There are so many improvements that needs to be done, but of course it's better than the government sector.
And thank you for your questions, so many, thank you. Hello there, Newsline. The proposed pay tax, the PAYE tax, is supposed to bring in 90 billion, which will never happen, whereas had they increased the withholding tax to 20%, it will bring in 120 billion for sure. Why is the government making blunder after blunder?
Yeah, I haven't done the calculation for us, but as I mentioned, the ideal way to do it is don't complicate the tax system. It has to be simple, easy to collect, easy to calculate, and then people are willing to pay taxes. This happened in Georgia earlier, if I recall right, During Saakashvili's time, Georgia had about, I think, 17 to 19 types of taxes. They basically cut it down for 6 types of taxes, brought the rates down by half, and the tax income increased, if I remember right, twofold to sixfold. Because when things are simplified, all want to pay, join the legal framework. No one want to basically tax evade and take shortcuts, because always it's respectable and everyone want to join the structure. So that is what we have to encourage. The more we complicate, the more we create issues there, it would be, people will be prone to, they will basically move out from paying taxes.
Another question is asking, do you agree that the tax will mainly affect employees, as the businesses, private doctors, lawyers and tuition masters, etc., will all pass on the tax downwards as indirect taxes? They raise their prices.
Absolutely. So some people, some employee categories or some business categories, they can pass the taxes down, but some cannot. And the challenge is, I saw even on, people have written on Facebook, because since the taxes were low, some people have taken housing loans, vehicle loans, and when they done the salary calculation, I think they keep about 30% or 40% for expenditure. And now with the taxes, basically you don't have a 30% or 40% for your household expenditure, and now you are in big trouble, because you have a vehicle lease, and some of the banks, if you are paying the salary, or if you are paying the loan on a floating interest rate, now your loan installment has also increased, and you are paying taxes, and everything has, your salary is constant, but everything else is increasing.
I think I'm going to have to tell my co-producer Harshana that we need to do a program on mental health and as how taxes affect mental health. But here's a message. I'd like to take it because it's coming from Malaysia, a viewer from Malaysia. If they trim the civil service, where will the sacked civil staff get jobs? How are they to find jobs in the country?
Of course, there will be an impact on them, but the problem is, by them sitting there will also not solve the problem. My observation is, when you put them into the deep end and when you allow people to work, open for opportunities, they will find themselves to overcome it. And it can have a structured system where you provide some level of relief at the beginning till you find a job, and it can be also phased out. And I think there were some programs have already been suggested. But just because that they will lose a job doesn't mean, because already you have a double whammy. Anyway, they are not doing a job, and you have to pay them. It is better that you get rid of the job and still pay them, at least to get some productive work done. But now when you calculate their office cost, their air conditioning cost, energy cost, their travel expenses and everything, it's completely a loss.
So, or like the Sri Lanka Ports Authority, where if you tell about 2,000 people to stay at home, continue to pay them their basic salary, but not pay them their, they actually make some money, because they have to provide them 3 meals a day. And so they can save on that. 2 times 2,000, do your sums, it'll be all right. But here's something for the road here. The people are saying, when will the government start making cost cutting? Because that's where it all apparently starts, according to this very long message.
Yes, for us, now we are in a different context. With elections coming in, generally our practice have been, who have been in power, they basically announce another round of bonanzas to win the election. So we really don't know which direction this would go. So in that case, if we again announce that sort of massive relief programs, relief in the sense like, I saw they are going to give 10 kilograms of rice for every household, like the poor households. Likewise, so I mean, if that direction that if we were to take, I mean, we are heading definitely towards a massive disaster. So I think the government needs to, ideally they should have done it from this year beginning, from last budget. But we are already late, so I don't know when are they going to plan to start it. But definitely
they should do it.
They definitely should do it.
Donna Fernando, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Faraz.
And that's the way it was on Newsline Live this evening. Take care, have a great evening, and there is something you can do too. Why don't you write to the Treasury Secretary and ask them how many ministers have their car benefits and petrol benefits taxed before they get the balance of their salaries. Take care, have a great evening, and God bless you all.